Music from Blues Traveller on the Richie Allen Show, 24 and a half minutes past the hour. That's Run Around. We're all gone a bit mad with the weather, you see. We're all gone a bit mad with the weather. Lots and lots of tweets about Gerard Batten and that interview with Joe Coburn on BBC Two. It's on the BBC website if you want to see it yourself. We'll leave that one there for now, though. It's been reported in the last 20 minutes or thereabouts that the Labour Party's governing body has agreed to support a referendum on Brexit, but only under certain circumstances, namely if Labour cannot get changes to the government's deal or if Labour cannot secure a general election. It has been reported there were extraordinary scenes at the National Executive Committee. Apparently Tom Watson storming out, that's the deputy leader, at one stage because he wants the party to campaign for a referendum under all circumstances. Right. Will the country be taking part in European Union parliamentary elections next month? Well, the political parties of this country are certainly preparing for such a scenario and eventuality. And of course we've seen a brand new, or we've seen the establishment of a couple of brand new parties, and the Brexit Party, headed by Nigel Farage, the former head of UKIP, of course, has certainly seemed to hit the ground running. They're everywhere. They're doing very well. Let's introduce our first guest of the show today. He's a medical doctor, very well known for his books, but also for his television presenting. He's appeared on many, many programmes here in the UK and in the US. He's running for the Brexit Party in the now seemingly certain EU elections in a few weeks. Let's welcome to the programme Dr. David Bull, who will be campaigning for a seat for the Northwest. David, welcome to the programme. How are you?
Hello, very good afternoon to you, Richie. I'm very well, thank you very much indeed. Hope you are.
I am, and thanks for coming on. It's a pleasure to have you on the programme. First of all, David, how certain are we that these elections will indeed take place next month? It seems to be nailed on, is it?
Well, I think your guess is pretty much as good as mine. Theresa May has obviously tried to get her deal through 3 times. She's going to try and get some sort of deal done with Labour and then try and get that back to the House. But quite frankly, as you see now with Labour saying they're going to push towards a second referendum, I think the likelihood of her deal getting through is fading by the day. And, you know, as a result, we will have to fight the European election, something that we should not be doing because, remember, we were promised that the result of the first referendum was binding, that all the parties would abide by it, and therefore Brexit should have happened. But I think the likelihood is we will have to fight the European elections.
Now, you've kind of answered my next question, because some people would say, why not refuse to stand? Because it's an outrage. A colleague of yours is a great friend of mine. She comes on regularly, Anne Widdicombe. And Anne spoke to me a couple of weeks ago, just before announcing for the Brexit Party. And I knew she was going to do something. I could feel it in my bones. And she said that the spectre of preparing for and planning for European parliamentary elections is just horrifying and shocking, and it's completely outrageous. So why not refuse to stand, and why not prepare the Brexit Party for the next general election? You could do very well. Why haven't you taken that approach?
Okay, so let me just explain what we're doing. So essentially, Theresa May has said that we will continue to be in the EU until October the 31st. By doing that, it means that we have to fight these European elections. So the fundamental reason, and the reason that I've got involved, because obviously politics is not my original calling. You know, obviously I'm a medical doctor, I work in television, I'm a very passionate campaigner for health issues. But I had to do something. There is such a fundamental fragmentation of democracy, because I have never in my whole life witnessed such anger from around the country. People were told that this was going to be a binding referendum, essentially a once-in-a-lifetime chance to say, what did we want? Did we want to remain in the EU, or did we want to leave? And we had a resounding result, and the majority said they wanted to leave. Now, parties of all colours said they would abide by that referendum result. 3 years later, of course, we're still in a complete mess. No one knows what's going on. And the most extraordinary thing, and I think the thing that's really shone through for me, is that this issue has transcended any sort of former political boundaries. So I think those old classifications of being Labour, of being Conservative, of being Liberal have gone. This has united people because this is all about something far bigger than Brexit. This is about making sure that we are fighting for democracy. We're fighting for a free, independent, self-governing country. And that's why I had to do something. You know, what is going on is simply not acceptable. And people around the country are livid.
Did you see it coming, David? Did you see it coming when the election result was announced in June of 2016? I got it wrong. I've always believed in the UK outside of the European Union and Ireland. I'm obviously an Irishman, and I remember Lisbon, I remember Nice, and I couldn't understand. I'm a socialist or a champagne socialist, right? That's what I am. And I think old socialists were people like Tony Benn were obviously very much aware of what the European Union would mean ultimately for workers' rights and for competition in this country. So I've always been anti-European Union. When the result was announced, I didn't take any joy from it because I suspected that it would be reversed and that the empire, for want of a better way of putting it, would strike back. Were you surprised at what happened in the last 3 years, or did you see it coming?
I was very surprised. I have to say, I actually originally was asked by the Secretary of State for Health to write an article about why we should remain from a health point of view. And actually, in the course of doing that research, I decided that this was wrong and we had to leave, and I campaigned very vigorously to leave. Now, interestingly, in London, everyone thought there is no way that result would have happened. But actually, it was when I went into the Northwest, when I went around the country with my job, I just thought the politicians in London are so disconnected. They've got this result wrong. And obviously, when that result came, I was incredibly shocked and surprised, I think, as many people were. But I thought, like you, that was the end of it. I thought that the politicians would actually abide by what they said. I thought they would actually respect the democratic vote. So, no, I didn't see this coming. And quite frankly, I just think it's just a travesty. You know, we are the mother of democracies. We are held up around the world as the sort of guiding light of democratic principle. And right now, our parliamentary process looks horrific. We are kowtowing to Brussels. We're doing what the EU wants us to do. And it's time that we actually believed in ourselves. And I think there is a very, very fundamental problem here. We need to see this as a very positive move. Whether you voted leave or remain, and many of my friends voted to remain, we have to unite around the democratic purpose and say, okay, people voted, let's get on with it and let's be really, really positive.
What about those? There will be those who say, it's interesting, I was looking at one or two of your colleagues, those who have been announced, Martin Daubney and others, who've been announced as candidates for the Brexit Party. They've not tried to distance themselves from Nigel, but they've gone to lengths to state very clearly, well, look, I didn't vote for Nigel in the past or UKIP. I find that interesting. Do you think, looking back at the campaigning before the referendum, I mean, Nigel Farage gets a lot of stick even to this day for that famous poster with the queues of people lining up to come into the country. Do you think that, you know, campaigning for the Brexit Party, that there'll have to be a different approach taken to the way maybe UKIP campaigned? And I'm not saying I disagree with anything UKIP did back then at all. I'm just saying there are those that will say that Nigel kind of, his opponents would say he went into the gutter a little bit with the lines of immigrants poster, which caused so much offence. What do you think of that? What about yourself and your own feelings about Nigel and Nigel's positions on these issues?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's no secret that I'm a lifelong Conservative supporter. You know, I stood as a parliamentary candidate in Brighton 10 years ago, and so have always supported the Conservative Party, and I've never been a member of UKIP. But this is a very different party. This is a new party that's been created, and really, as I said right at the top, it's really a coming together of everyone from across the political spectrum, just to say we have to fight for people who voted to leave. And so, therefore, I wouldn't read too much into the past because, as you rightly say, all the candidates, and what was amazing, we went to a meeting the other day, I looked around the room and we are united by a common purpose, but we couldn't be more different. You know, black, white, Asian, you know, straight, gay, also, you know, from the north, from the south, from wherever. And that's just wonderful. Left, right, It doesn't matter. The fact is we're fighting for a common purpose, and that is to restore the democratic principle of this country.
Is there a job to be done in terms of, I hear from a lot of centrists, and they tell me, Richie, there were so many lies told by everybody before the 2016 referendum. No, I'm not endorsing that statement. I'm just saying I hear that from people. They say, everybody lied, Richie. They all lied. Do you have to keep that in mind, David? By the way, Dr. David Bull, the television presenter, the author and the medical doctor, live on the line with us today. Great to have him on. He's campaigning in the Northwest. Should we have European parliamentary elections next month? So the question I was going to ask is, do you have to be aware of that kind of not apathy? I don't think there's apathy. I think you're right. People are really angry, so there is no apathy. But people are wary, thinking, "Oh, everybody lies to us." Have you got to be aware of that when you're campaigning?
Yeah, I mean, actually, when you look back, and obviously I've commentated on this, I've been on television for 24 years. Yeah. I've commentated on politics on Jeremy Vine's show, which was formerly Matthew Wright's show for a very long time. And if you actually look back at what we were asked to vote on, it was a binary choice. Do you want to leave the EU or do you want to stay a member of the EU? And it was made very clear at that point that that meant leaving the EU, leaving the customs union and leaving the single market. And if you remember, the government of the day spent a lot of money sending out a leaflet to every household in the country saying, look, these are the points, this is what it will mean, and that your democratic vote would be respected. So, yes, I would agree that various parties used campaigning techniques, but essentially, I keep coming back to the principle, which is that there was a campaign that was waged. It was enormous. The turnout was over 72%. It was the largest ever democratic vote by share. And if you look at the Northwest, which is what I'm interested in, you've got over 3.5 million people who voted to leave. And their will is not being respected.
Yeah, you're right. Look, I can't argue with that. I was very interested in the comments that Jonathan Rhys-Davies made on Question Time last Thursday and the ridicule that he faced later on for just telling the truth, It's anti-democratic, people are angry, regardless of whether you... And I meet a lot of people who voted Remain who are cheesed off at the fact that the result hasn't been implemented because they understand the implications of that as well, even if they still want to stay in the European Union. I'll tell you what makes me chuckle a bit, David. Nigel has been speaking at these rallies, and I have to say the Brexit Party hit the ground really, really well, running, using that cliche. It's very good, it's very polished, it's very clever. But when Nigel says, we're the anti-political class and we're the anti-career politicians party, this makes me chuckle. Nigel has been an MEP since the 90s. We've got my friend Anne Widdecombe. You've got Annunziata Rees-Mogg. You've got the very famous television presenter Dr. David Bull. Pull the other one, David, about anti-career politicians and political class. Go on.
Well, you're right. We've got some politicians, but the vast majority actually are just normal people who have done lots of things in life. And I'll tell you the most refreshing thing about my fellow candidates is that when I look around the room, they've had real jobs. They've had real experience, whether it's in business, whether it's in industry, whether they're doctors or dentists or lawyers or whatever, it doesn't matter. And actually, for the first time in my life, I am so energized by what we are trying to achieve. And actually, there was such an amazing feeling in that room that we were all pulling together to do something really important, something that is actually a pivotal moment in the history of Britain. And I've never, ever been in a position like this before.
Brilliant stuff. DavidBull.com. Just a couple of more questions while I have you on. I know you're busy, but while I have you on, we won't talk again, I don't think, before the election. Although,
I hope we do.
Well, we might do, yeah. You're welcome to come back anytime you want. David's website is davidbull.com. What about the Stephen Yaxley Lennon phenomenon? Now, I live in Manchester, and he was in Salford some weeks ago. Look, I've always said, I put my hands up, I don't like the guy. I don't like violent people who advocate violence, who have been violent. I don't like people who scapegoat people. I've no time for him. That being said, I would never have deplatformed him or banned him. I believe in free speech, even for those who say the most heinous things, because at least they're there and we can see them and we can debate them and we can debunk them and all the rest of it. He's a bit of a phenomenon, and you're going up against him. Do you expect to meet him at debates and such like? And if so, do you look forward to that? What do you make of him?
Rather than commenting on him in particular, I think the thing about politics is that we need to change it for good. It's got to stop being this mudslinging competition.
Yeah.
We have to put forward a very, very positive message. I, like you, believe in the power of the word rather than the power of the fist. And I think, this is now so serious that we cannot resort to cheap gimmicks and tactics.
Oh, we might have lost David momentarily there. I hope we haven't. Dr. David Bull is on the line, or he was on the line. We might have him back now. Let's see, can we get him back? David Bull is on the line. David is standing for the Brexit Party. Should we have European parliamentary elections next month? And he's back on the line. We lost you momentarily, David. Sorry about that. You were saying...
I'm so sorry.
No, it's not your fault. It happens. It just drops out. Don't worry about it. You were saying you want to move away from the mudslinging and that type of politics in this race.
Yeah, and actually, I do believe in the power of the ballot box. We've done a great deal in this country to ensure that democracy is copied around the world. And this is the time to have very, very serious conversations. It's not the time to shout at people. Let's have a really cogent discussion. But, actually, in the last 48 hours, I've put on over 4,000 followers on Twitter from the Northwest. And that just says to me, and just the overwhelming sentiment from people in the Northwest, is they are very angry about what's going on. And they want to see people actually doing what they say they'll do, which would be a massive change in politics as far as I could see. And so for me, this not only is a pivotal moment, it's also going to be a very positive moment, because we are going to send a very clear message to Westminster that this cannot go on, that it will not be tolerated. And there's one other thing which answers your question right at the top of the show, which was, I believe that this is much bigger than Brexit itself. I think the Brexit Party is also about changing politics for good, and that will involve not only the European elections, but Westminster as well.
Great stuff, David. The Twitter handle, before I ask you my final question, is at Dr. for Doctor, at Dr. David Bull. That's where you'll find David on Twitter, and it's davidbull.com. Now, this is non-Brexit related, but it's interesting. The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, has been talking about anti-vaxxers. And there's been a lot of talk about encouraging social media companies to delete or ban people who they believe are putting out misinformation about vaccines. Now, I'm not an anti-vaxxer, I'm not. But I'm very interested in things happening in Ireland, obviously my country, and in Scandinavia and in the Far East, with respect to one particular vaccine, which I won't get into. There's been a call in Ireland, and there's been calls in this country, to mandate vaccines for children, to make it compulsory. So this is a bit cheeky of me now, putting you on the spot like this. I don't agree with that. I really don't. I believe in discussion, open discussion, people being listened to, and their fears and their questions being answered. I don't like the idea of mandatory vaccinations, telling parents you must do this or else. Give us a quick comment on that, because it's a big issue today and this week.
This goes back to a report by Andrew Wakefield, if you remember, into the MMR vaccine, which was many, many years ago. In fact, I was hosting Watchdog Health Check at the time, and essentially it was a very false piece of scientific advice that was printed in a medical journal, and unfortunately it was taken out of context. As a result, there has been this sort of notion that vaccines somehow cause illness. It's simply not true. Vaccines protect children against disease, but to do that, you have to have what we call herd immunity. You need to get over 90% of the population immunized. And the problem is, by having anti-vaxxers in the population, what that means is you are actually if you do not vaccinate your children, you are putting other children's lives at risk. So the argument goes that actually by having children in schools that aren't immunized, they are then a risk to children who also may not have been immunized for other reasons. So I agree with you. I don't like using the law to enforce things, but I'm now coming round to the opinion that actually, we provide education which is free at the point of need. And I think there has to be a discussion with the parents to say, look, it's a give and take. We will provide this education, but you have to protect not only your child, but every child in that school. So I agree with you. I think we need to come down very heavily on those parents, but we need to explain it to them in a way they understand. We need to tell them the science. And we need to make sure they're not frightened so they can make a really positive decision to ensure their child is vaccinated.
And yet I've had, just finally on this, I've spoken to GPs on this programme, older GPs, practicing GPs, not just in the US, but here as well. When I say older, significantly older, and they say, many of them have said to me, they like the idea of children getting the measles and the chicken pox because it builds their own immune systems. And some of them have said to me that they reject this idea of herd immunity and that the unvaccinated being a danger to anybody else. I don't want to dwell on this because I want to let you go because we didn't come on to talk about this. But I also have a big concern about what's happening with the Gardasil story in the Republic of Ireland. As a man of, it doesn't matter that I'm educated, but I went through the education system, third level educated, degree, taught to evaluate the information that comes into me, look at the principles of what's coming in. I look at what's happening in Ireland and I see a problem there, and I see it in Scandinavia, and I see people being dismissed. And I think that's where a lot of the fear is coming from, because there's not been any transparency around the possible side effects of one vaccine or another. Like I said, I'm not anti-vaxxer per se. I'm for open forum, open discussion, and not for compelling people to do stuff. Just final question on the older doctors saying, look, we should all get these things when we're young because it's ultimately great for us in the future. It builds our immune systems. Go ahead. Final word to you, and thanks for talking to us about Brexit, and I can't wait to see how this goes in the next few weeks. But final word on vaccines to you.
Okay, so just to the vaccine point, these vaccines have been recommended after they've had serious scientific scrutiny, and we would not implement any kind of vaccination program if we didn't believe, A, it was safe, and B, it was cost effective. And that's why they're recommended, and that's why all children are immunized. To the older doctors who think that the herd immunity is not right, I would take issue with that. We know that to ensure that we protect children, and I think actually people have forgotten how serious these diseases are. They maim children, they kill children. And so I want to see every child immunized because we know it will protect them. And if I can go back to Brexit very finally, thank you so much for having me on.
You're welcome.
And I hope that I can talk to you again in the next 24 days, I think it is, until Election Day.
Well, it's going to be interesting. We're going to have to wait and see until it's absolutely certain and it's announced that it is going ahead, but it looks like it's absolutely nailed on. And please, in the future, do me a favour. In the future, come on and talk to me about vaccines again. I'll get a very nice, a very kind and a very decent doctor, a genuine doctor, a medical doctor who takes a slightly different approach, not anti-vax, but a slightly different approach. I'd like to get into that again in the future. Really enjoyed having you on, David. Really, really good luck to you in the future. It's going to be a fascinating few weeks.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Richie.
Cheers, mate. Bye for now. Dr. David Bull. It's davidbull.com, and David is on Twitter. It's at @DRBull. That's at @DRBull on Twitter. I'm not going to get into a protracted argument with David about the situation in Ireland because it's unfair to do that. I didn't bring him on to talk about that. That was a bit of a kind of a lobbed in question at the end, only because Matt Hancock, the health secretary, has been talking about this today, and David Bull is a medical doctor. So I'm not going to be jumping down his throat. It's obvious. You know what I think about this, and I've expressed my opinion on it many times before. 12 minutes to the top of the hour. This is the Richie Allen Show for Tuesday, April 30th, 2019. Let's have some Kim Wilde. And when we come back, I'll read some of your comments, and then we'll move on. Lana Lockteff joining me in the second hour.